This is Dr. Frank Adams on Sirius XM 81. It's Animal Tuesday. Coming up in just a few seconds, Helen Peppe is going to join us talking about her wonderful book, Pigs Can't Swim, a memoir talking about her life growing up in Maine on a farm, the youngest of 9 children, all of the things that happened to her, which I think will illuminate a lot of us who are like me, a city boy born and raised. Our second feature quickly. What's happening in the health world? The flu is still on the top of the list. We have 22 states in this country still with widespread flu activity. It's decreasing, no doubt, but the CDC says it's going to be here with us until May. Believe it or not, it is not too late to get vaccinated. H1N1 is the dominant virus this year. The vaccine covers that quite well. If you haven't been vaccinated, don't delay it because it's still out there. I've seen it even last week, so it is a big issue health-wise. Do not avoid getting that flu shot. If you have calls for us on Helen Peppe's book, Pigs Can't Swim, a memoir, let me give you the toll-free numbers now before we get started talking with her. Maybe you're going to have a comment. Maybe you've read the book. Maybe you haven't. Maybe you grew up in similar circumstances. Call us with your questions, your comments. 1-877-NYU-DOCS, 1-877-698-3627. We love email, docs@SiriusXM.com. Let me introduce Helen Peppe to our audience. Good morning, Helen.
Good morning.
Thanks for taking the time to be with us here on Dr. Radio on our animal show. And again, Helen Peppe has written Pigs Can't Swim, a memoir. And again, as a city boy, so-called, reading your life, your early life, was really illuminating to me, and I know it is for many others. So perhaps as an introduction, Helen, talk a little bit about, set the scene for us. Here you are, the young. I know it's like to be the youngest of 3, but you're the youngest of 9. And again, I'm growing up here in New York City. So set the scene for us a bit.
Okay. Well, I lived about 15 miles from a town, and even that town wasn't, very large. It was a very small town, and we had one neighbor who was about a quarter of a mile away, and we never spoke to them. They were down the hill from us, and past us, there was nothing but wilderness, a cemetery, woods, a sand pit, and you could go for several miles through the woods past our house, and eventually you would get to New Gloucester, but it was still very wooded and wilderness-like. So it was never unusual to see deer and moose, a bear, bobcats around our yards. And it was always, dark. It gets, especially in the winter, very, very dark, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. No city lights. So city people have a hard time understanding what dark really is. You can't see anything when you're out at night in the country when it's dark. There's a little bit of light in the winter, like when there's snow on the ground and the moon is full, but it's still really, really dark. And my father had, big lights out on the back porch that would illuminate just a little bit of the porch and the steps going out into the darkness, but then there was always like this big blanket of black you'd have to walk into in order to go to the barn to do the animals. So you have to think, like in the winter when we had to go out in the mornings before school to do the chores, we would go out in the dark, and then in the afternoons when we got home to do chores, we would again go out in the dark to do the animals. So very different from living in the city. When I was little, I yearned to live in the city and be a city girl.
I see. I purposely didn't complain this morning about how cold it is here in New York City, because I can imagine here you are growing up in rural Maine, and of course we have all our automatic heat and everything else. And I didn't bring that up at all because I'm sure some of the conditions you were living under expose you to much colder temperatures than we've been complaining about, and even more snow than we're complaining about here in the city.
my mother would start the wood stove. She would get up first in the morning, and she would start the wood stove, and we had one in the cellar, and eventually we had one that was upstairs in the kitchen. But I remember when we just had the one in the cellar, and because we didn't have a lot of money, they didn't want to have the heat on for the main house. So it was so cold. And they had doors. When we had the wood stove in the kitchen, they put up doors to go upstairs, just these little flimsy kind of things that you would pull shut so that the heat wouldn't rise and escape out of the bottom floor. So those of us who slept upstairs, it was freezing up there, and that was in the winter. And then in the summer, it was so hot because we didn't have, any air conditioning or fans until much later. So yes, very, very, very cold. And, when I was very young, I didn't have actual boots. She would put wool socks over my shoes, and then over the wool socks, there would be men's wool socks that she would put over my shoes, and then she would tie a sandwich bag over those so that I wouldn't get wet when I went outside. But the bread bags used to be way more sturdy than they are now, so you could really walk across the yard and not have your the bread bag rip. But now, of course, they would not make good shoes.
Yes. We're talking with Helen Peppe. By the way, Helen is a writer, also a photographer. She currently lives near Portland, Maine, and we're talking about her wonderful book, Pigs Can't Swim, a memoir. And we're here on Dr. Radio, Sirius XM 81. It's that first show of the month where we focus on animals in our lives, and we're going to come up to that in just a moment, how animals were a wonderful part and continue to be a wonderful part of Helen's life. If you have questions, you've read the book, you haven't read the book, it doesn't matter. Call us at 1-877-NYU Docs, 1-877-698-3627. Email us at docs@SiriusXM.com. Helen, it's been said by many, many people, you grew up quickly on a farm. I remember visiting a farm looking for a puppy, actually, at one point, and being taken on a tour by like a 2 or 3 year old child who kind of explained all the reproductive things going on the farm. So talk a little bit about it's kind of a quick education in life, isn't it?
Well, it is, and my mother tried to hide from us when animals, did what they did to reproduce. She tried to hide it, so if we saw the cows or anything, she would tell us to get in the house. The cats, of course, were never spayed or neutered. And she would always, if she caught us looking at any of the animals having sex, she would say, "Get in the house. I don't want you to look at that." Or even when the cows had babies, when they were calving, she would, if she saw that we were there watching, she would rush us into the house because she didn't want us to see and know. But certainly because I myself had rabbits and loved having the rabbits, you saw her all the time. Right. And I know there was no separating them. You would try to, separate them because it looks very violent. So when I was little, I would go, "Oh no, he's hurting her," and I would try to pick him up. And they would be like attached as one animal. There would be no way you could separate them.
Right. We're talking with Helen Peppe about her book, Pigs Can't Swim, a memoir, and talking about her life growing up on a rural farm in Maine. And you, again, setting the scene a little bit, the youngest of 9, and in many ways the one who didn't kind of fit in. And one thing that was in terms of animals on a farm, obviously animals are food and help people survive and live. But this, as you got older, you realized, in fact, this repulsed you. Talk a little bit about your move towards being a vegetarian.
Well, how it happened is that for me, because I was the youngest and the sister above me is almost 3 years older, the animals were more like my friends, so I would spend a lot of time in the pig pens and in the pastures with the calves and the piglets, and also with the rabbits and the sheep. Certainly, I was in the pasture a lot with the ewes as well, and then when they would disappear, because my parents were slaughtering them or bringing them to be slaughtered, it took me a while to figure out that the meat on the table were those animals that had disappeared, because my mother wouldn't talk about it. Once the animal left, if anybody mentioned who it was on the table, she would have a fit. So we weren't supposed to talk about that kind of stuff. So being the youngest, it took me a while to figure it out. And when I did, it was horrifying. I couldn't believe it. And, we used to have to participate in, when the meat came back from the slaughterhouse, in grinding it up, cutting it up, packaging it, telling what was in the package with a marker, putting it in the freezer. And because you're so young, there was this separation between what was in your pasture and what came back from the slaughterhouse. But very quickly with the chickens, when I became old enough to help with that, I realized that these were the animals that I had been playing with in the pastures, and it was so repulsive to think that I had eaten part of that animal, and it would make me gag. And so my mother would once I realized my mother would put the food on my plate, and I would push it over the edge underneath my plate and hide it. And so when she would pick the plates up afterwards and find the food there, she would be very angry with me for wasting food.
And you talk so lovingly about your folks, your dad, your mom in the book, but you also describe how really overwhelmed they are with 9 children. And talk a little bit about being a parent. And you're a parent. Helen has 2 daughters, I believe. Talk a little bit about that.
I have a son and a daughter.
A son and a daughter, okay.
Yes, and my son is 23, and my daughter is 11. And it wasn't until I had kids of my own that I began to realize how difficult it must have been from my mother particularly to live all that distance from any people, any town. She never had conversed with anybody, not, like I said, the neighbors, she never spoke to them. They're a quarter mile down the road and nothing, never spoke. So she didn't have adult conversation beyond my father and the kids. And then occasionally they would, a few times a year, she would see her sisters. So it wasn't until I had my kids where I started to think, oh my goodness, 9 kids, and often more than 9, because they, got married and they had kids. So the house would be so full and it would be so chaotic. And it was a small house, with so many people and only one bathroom with all these people. So on a morning like this, where we would get up and have to go to school, there would be a line at the bathroom door, to go in. And it must have been so hard for her. And to be able to pay attention to the kids must have been so hard. And, of course, she couldn't pay attention to all of us. And she couldn't give us all, the love that she would have wanted to.
Right.
Because she was also trying to take care of my father and all the animals and the house. And then she had this youngest daughter who would never shut up. She was always asking so many questions that were impossible for her to answer because they were big questions, and she just couldn't answer them. And, now we have Google, so when my daughter asks me questions, and I can't answer them, we look it up. But we had nothing. She had no way of getting the information that I was asking, and it must have been very, very frustrating for her, so that she got angry with all of the questions. And then I wouldn't even eat what she put on my plate, which was very frustrating for her. So it's not. I guess it's not until you get older that you can look back and have that empathy.
And it's hard to fathom, and the word overwhelmed doesn't even come close, I think, to what your folks had to do, and as you describe it, and trying to do the right thing, obviously, but just unable to fulfill that. This is Dr. Frank Adams on Sirius XM 81. This is our animal show. We talk about the role of animals in our lives, and we're going to focus in a moment about the role of animals in Helen Peppe's coming of age, and she describes it so beautifully in her book, Pigs Can't Swim, a memoir that I hope everyone will read it. And if you have comments, questions, quickly, our time goes so quickly here on Dr. Radio, 1-877-NYU-DOCS, 1-877-698 3627. Email us, docs@SiriusXM.com. We'll get your email on the air. Clearly from reading the book, you really sought refuge in two things. It seemed like the animals, and then authors like Stephen King and James Herriot. These were your places you would go, I think, amid all that chaos, to be in a different world, in a sense. And so many, a variety of animals you describe in the book, and horses and pigs and things. But talk a little bit about that world of being just with the animals.
Well, when I was really young, I mean, and it didn't matter, that animals bit me or that they chased me and rammed me up against things. I accepted the animals for what they were and for their danger. We certainly, the horses that we had were not trained, and they were very, very dangerous and, would bite us and kick at us. But I did not see them as bad in any way. It never made me think, oh, that's why they slaughter them, because they bite. The dogs, always I stayed with the dogs, and they would follow me around. And when I was 8, my mother gave me a puppy, and they couldn't come in the house. My dog couldn't. She would let them in as far as the entry or right into the kitchen, but they couldn't go past that point. And my dog was only allowed in the entry, and because she was never housebroken. So they had to stay out. But it didn't matter, and I would sit outside in the yard next to the doghouse, and I would read, and my dog had to be tied, and I would just stay there with her reading. And I did read a lot of Stephen King, and I chose Stephen King, I think, because he came from a world like mine, and even though his books were scary, some of them, not all of them, the ones that were scary, he seemed always to respect women and children and animals. And there was safety in that, because you could always feel that overriding narrator that had the child, really was advocating for the child and for the female. And I particularly loved Firestarter. When I was little, and I wanted so badly to be able to do things with my mind. And so he was a wonderful place to escape to. And, of course, he grew up in Durham, the Durham area, which, wasn't far from where we were. And it, you would think about that when you would go around on the school bus. So, and then when I would come home from school, the first place I would go would be the yard to see the animals and to stay with them. And when my brother bought a horse, I would go out to the barn and sit with the horse. Even though he bit and kicked and was this violent stallion, he never did any of those things to me. And I didn't think about those things. Even though I saw them, I didn't think about that. I just wanted their company. And when I was 12 and I was finally able to finagle my way to free lease a horse, I spent all of my time with her, that I wasn't doing chores. And we had a wonderful relationship. And when I rode her, I didn't use a saddle or a bridle. I rode her bareback, and she had a halter, a raggedy old halter, and I used twine from the hay bales so I could direct her. And we went everywhere. And because I was always for her, I would let her stop and graze and eat leaves off the bushes and do whatever she wanted as we went along, and she seemed to really enjoy it as much as I did.
It's again, a wonderful book. I'm telling everyone out there listening, we're talking with Helen Peppe about Pigs Can't Swim, a memoir, her life growing up on a farm in rural Maine, and the hardships and the work involved. And there's a lot talking about all the work that has to be done. Helen just mentioned all those chores, and where she could find refuge with animals of many, many types. And with her reading, we only have her for about 5 more minutes. So if you have a comment, call us at 1-877-NYU Docs, 1-877-698-3627. You can email us at docs@SiriusXM.com. We'll get your email on the air. Some people may be wondering about the title, and there's just a wonderful chapter about finding a pig on the road, and pigs. Again, city boy, don't know anything about farm animals, but pigs clearly are very intelligent, so talk about how that title comes in there. Can pigs swim? Actually,
yes, pigs can swim.
Right. And aren't they very intelligent?
Yes, they are very intelligent,
right.
and they can swim. And the reason for that title, and people ask me a lot, one of the things they'll write to me is say, I really thought pigs could swim. And I say, yes, they can. But my family, even though they saw that pig swimming across the lake, they insisted that pigs couldn't swim. For them, seeing wasn't believing. They had heard in their minds certain things, and regardless of what they saw, they would hold to what they had heard. And they were very stubborn like that, so they had a very hard time changing what was in their heads. Including my siblings. Once my parents had told them something, or a farmer had told them something, they wouldn't be able to shake it, even though they saw the visual proof that showed the contrary. So that's why that book is named Pigs Can't Swim, because my parents did find this little pig on the road, and my father went out and he caught it while we were on our way to vacation at a camp. So he took the pig, and it was just a very young pig. And, of course, the pig wanted to escape and get back, to whatever it was. And when I was little, I always thought it must have been to its mother that it wanted to go back to, because it was young. And he swam right across the lake. And there he is, swimming, paddling, looking like a little dog, paddling across the lake. And everybody is saying, he can't swim, he can't swim. They want to catch him so that they can eat themselves later.
Right.
But they're insisting that he can't swim. And, of course, I'm always the annoying one pointing out the obvious. And I'm saying, but he can swim. Look, he can swim.
Right.
You're wrong. And people hate being told they're wrong, even when they're wrong. So they hold to what they had thought. And in the book, there's lots of instances that show that even though my family is incorrect, and I'm trying to say, but look, that's not what you're saying. It's not true. They will insist right to the last minute that they're right.
Right. And more than once in the book, you kind of argue back and forth with your one of the older brothers about animals having souls and going to heaven. And this is so poignant and so touching. Helen, it's just a wonderful book, and I'm glad so much having read it, and it's out there for everyone. Again, Helen Peppe, Pigs Can't Swim, a memoir. I hope everyone will read it. And Helen, thank you so much for writing us, and hopefully we'll have you back on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
Great, Helen. Thank you so much. Our time has flown by. We are now at that point in the show. We're going to do a quick break. By the way, everyone, please read Pigs Can't Swim by Helen Peppe. It's a wonderful book. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back, and this again.